let's look at the processing we would do after the fact in Photoshop. But right before we do that, I just want to mention one more thing that we haven't really covered. We talked about opening JPEG and TIFF images from the bridge, but what if you want to open up an image that's not in the bridge? Maybe it's one out on your desktop or on a memory card or something. Here's what you do. You go to Open, and you click on the image you want to open. And it's going to open as a JPEG. If you click Open, it's just going to open as a standard old JPEG. However, if you go to Open, and where it says the format of the image, which is JPEG, you're just going to force it to open up in Camera Raw. You just choose Camera Raw instead from the Format pop-up menu, and it opens up in Camera Raw. Okay? That being said, now let's switch back to regular JPEGs. Let's go ahead and open up a JPEG image here. How about this one right here? So here's a regular JPEG. And so if we could do most of our color correction inside Camera Raw, why would we ever have to do anything else? Well, sometimes you do. Sometimes in the course of other things that you're going to do, you look at your image and go, you know what? I need to do a color correction. Or if you just don't want to work in Camera Raw and you do need to know how to use curves for color correction, because sometimes you just can't get the color right any other way. Although I think most of the time, if you use Camera Raw, you're going to be so close you probably won't need it. I still find times every day where I need to go to curves for a quick fix. So, let's show you how to use curves. Before you do any color correction in curves, there's one thing you have to do first, and that's you have to kind of set a preference setting in an odd place. And that is, go down here and click on the eyedropper tool, and you'll notice it's set to point sample. What point sample does is it gives you a reading of whatever single point that you click on. So let's say you want to find out how red his shirt is. So, right, if you click that point, it puts that color red as your foreground color. But here's the thing. Which color did you click on it? It clicks on one particular pixel. So let's zoom way in and you'll see what I mean. All right. Well, which pixel was it? Was it this pixel? Was it this red, this red, this red, this red, this red, red? Right. Which one did everyone's a little bit different. So if you want a more representative reading of the real area that's there, I recommend changing your image size from point sample to 3x3 average. That way you're getting a better representation of the area that you're clicking in instead of maybe just getting one stray pixel. All right. Now, there's one other thing I would recommend. I recommend setting at this point in time, unless you're using Adobe Lightroom, in which case there's a whole other case to be made for which color space you choose. But if you're going to be working with the bridge and Camera Raw and Photoshop, I recommend changing your color space to Adobe RGB 1998. I think it's a better color space for photographers by far than the default, which is sRGB. You do that by going to the color settings right here. Brings up this color setting dialog box. And you're going to change your RGB workspace from sRGB. All right. Well, and if you look, by the way, if you just run your cursor over this, it tells you at the bottom. See how it says description? It tells you that this reflects the characteristics of the average PC monitor. However, when that was written, it was, I believe, Photoshop 5.5. And if I remember right, from talking to Adobe, at the time it was designed to show you what web graphics look like on the average PC monitor, which at that time cost $75. So basically, this is for people who are designing web graphics and wanted their stuff to look good on your average consumer's monitor. Well, monitors have come a long way since then. If you look at the very last line, it says, ideal space for web work, but not recommended for pre-press, blah, blah, blah. We switch to right up here, Adobe RGB 1998. That's my recommendation right there. Click OK. And you're basically now in a working space that better color approximates the colors you'll be really using in photography. All right, so we've made those two little setups to get us going. Now it's time to start actually color correcting. Now, we don't really use levels so much for color correcting. Levels, although it can do some basic color correction, levels is basically more of a contrast tool. So if you wanted to use levels to kind of make the contrast look better, you would just basically drag the shadow slider to kind of the base of the mountain, the highlight slider to the base of it, and that's pretty much what you've got. So it's not that effective. It's kind of limited. You could go and do the individual channels here and kind of try to fix the red some and things like that, but it's a lot of work and it's not a lot of payoff. Though it can be done, and some people are very good at levels, I prefer, and most of the professionals today doing color correction they're doing it in Photoshop and not using Camera Raw are using curves. And you find it under the image menu, under adjustments, It's called curves right here. And I'm going to give you some starting numbers that you're going to use because you're going to let curves do most of the work for you. But first I'm going to introduce a set of numbers, and it's the last kind of get ready to do color correction thing that we need to do because we have to basically set up three things. Number one, choose your color space, which we did. Adobe RGB 1998. Number two, we got to set your sample size for your eyedropper to 3x3 average. Number three is this. You need to put in two numbers here using these eyedroppers. So double click on your shadow eyedropper, double click on it, and you're going to enter numbers here in the RGB settings. Now, if you are going to be printing to like an Epson inkjet printer, some nice photo quality printer, I use 7, 7, and 7. So I set my red to 7, my green to 7, and my blue to 7, and you jump between these fields using the tab key. All right, so that's my shadow color. It's a very, 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 very dark color, but it's not solid black. All right, and you click OK. Then you go to the highlights eyedropper, the one that's filled with white, double click on it, and up pops up this thing that says select target highlight color. So this really isn't a color picker from over here. It's a special one that lives inside of curves. And instead of 255, which is absolutely solid white with no detail, you're going to type in 245, 245, and 245, which gives you a very, 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 very light white, but it's not so white that it has no detail. You click OK, and those are your working numbers. So let's go ahead and click OK, and when you do, it's going to bring up this dialog box that says, do you want these as your new defaults? You're going to click yes. I want those as my defaults. You've now done the three things that have gotten you ready to color correct in Photoshop. And the good news is, even though they're not called preference settings, they kind of are preference settings. So the next time you go into Photoshop, those settings are already made. So the three things that we just did, you do once, and as long as you don't just, trash your preferences or reinstall Photoshop, those settings will be there every day waiting for you ready to go. Now let's color correct a photo.